As has been discussed throughout this class, the globalized world seems to continually shrink to a point where time and space are less and less important. Advancements in innovation in shipping allows goods to be loaded onto a ship, cross vast oceans, and then be unloaded and delivered to market in days. Air travel, which is not long ago was available only to the elite, is now affordable to all but the world's poorest. A phone call can be made across the globe for pennies a minute, and information travels across borders in electronic form of zeros and ones. The end of the Cold War and the East-West divide was another catalyst for globalization. The end of the Cold War brought feelings of jubilation and hope to the world. Many saw this as a new opportunity to usher in a prolonged period of peace. These hopes were quickly dashed as conflict moved from interstate conflict to intrastate conflict. Today, most wars are fought either within states or between states and non-state actors. The openness of globalization has created an environment which has allowed for illegal trade of goods, arms, people, and money to boom, while also allowing terrorists and criminal organizations to operate globally. They hide illicit goods in increasingly legitimate global trade. Global financial markets make it easier to launder and conceal money. Communicating with other operatives and associates around the globe has become easier. Traveling throughout the globe to carry out operations has increasingly become easier, and it has allowed non-state actors to cross national borders in violations of laws and to evade law enforcement efforts. The key characteristic to many of these activities is the border or borders between countries. It is the focus of this lecture will be on border security, as by definition global threats should cross national borders. And in a globalized world, it appears that physical borders are becoming more and more meaningless. The terrorist attacks of September 11th were the first exposure to the dark side of globalization for many of the world's citizens. However, the threat from non-state actors such as terrorist organizations and transnational criminal organizations was realized by governments prior to 9/11, as was the need to balance security concerns with the continued flow of legitimate travel and trade. Since the 1970s, countries in Europe have worked together on an intergovernmental basis to combat cross-border threats such as terrorism, drug trafficking, and illegal migration. From 1975 onward, intergovernmental cooperation was gradually established in the field of immigration, the right of asylum, police, and judicial cooperation. One such group was the Trevi Group. The Trevi Group was a group which the ministers of of various countries' home affairs met for the purpose of combating terrorism and coordinating police cooperation on terrorism in the European community. Ministers in this group discussed questions related to law and order and terrorism, and the various working parties and subparties were set up under these auspices. Another and more far-reaching international agreement within the European continent was the Schengen Agreement. The agreement began when France, Germany, and the Benelux nations of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg agreed that they would eliminate international borders between their countries. This border-free zone became known as the Schengen area after the small town in Luxembourg where the agreement was signed in June 1985. The Schengen area became a reality in spring 1995 when border checks were eliminated between the signatory nations and a single entry external border was created where members carried out border inspections with identical procedures based on common rules for visas and entry requirements as well as asylum rights. Several other European states signed on to the Schengen, and the treaty was eventually brought into the much larger European Union Treaty of Amsterdam in 1999. Cross-border cooperation was not limited to Europe or the European Union. The United States and Canada engaged in numerous examples of cross-border cooperation prior to 9/11. One such example was Project North Star, which was created in 1989 as a voluntary means of coordinating U.S. and Canadian law enforcement efforts with primary emphasis on countering drug activities along the border. In addition, the Cross-Border Crime Forum was created in 1997 as a bilateral consultative mechanism made up of 150 senior law enforcement, intelligence, and judicial officials from both countries in order to work together to address various cross-border crime issues. On a more operational level, the integrated border enforcement teams were created as a multi-agency law enforcement team made up from officers from both sides of the border, which worked together to coordinate both countries' efforts to target cross-border criminal activity. Following 9/11, it quickly became apparent that the hijackers' ability to travel undetected around the world was an important part of the success of their operation. Therefore, border security became an important focus of a greater global security strategy. The 9/11 Commission, which was paneled in order to study the events of 9/11 and what contributed to the hijacker success, was paneled. During their report, they stated, "We should do more to exchange terrorist information with trusted allies and raise U.S. and global border security standards for travel and border crossing across medium and long term through extensive international cooperation." The 9/11 Commission realized that border security was not something that the United States could achieve by going it alone. It realized almost right away that it required international cooperation from a variety of international partners. This, however, was not limited to just border security. This need for international cooperation was needed in a whole host of areas that we have discussed throughout this course, including terrorism, transnational crime, and cyber threats. Following the release of the 9/11 Commission's final report, 10 members of the Commission created what they called the 9/11 Public Discourse Project to educate the American people about the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission and to issue its reports with the goal of driving the needs for reforms. In essence, the 9/11 Discourse Project became a watchdog of the U.S. government and other stakeholders to see how their recommendations in their report were being implemented. In the area of international collaboration on borders and document security, the project concluded there has been some good collaboration between the United States and Interpol, but there has been little progress elsewhere. As a result, they gave the United States a D in this particular area. One of the recommendations of the Commission was to create a comprehensive strategy to prevent terrorist travel and their ability to overtake our borders. In this area, the Public Discourse Project gave a grade of incomplete. The reason for this incomplete grade was that the terrorism strategy was not scheduled to be released until December 17, 2005, after the initial report card by the Public Discourse Project was released. Finally, approximately 6 months after it was due, on May 2, 2006, the National Counterterrorism Center released its unclassified version of the National Strategy to Combat Terrorism Travel. Outlined in this report is a strategy to fight terrorists globally by employing 8 steps that are seen here on the screen. The report addresses 2 main topics or pillars, each supported by 3 strategic objectives. The first pillar is to enhance U.S. and foreign partner capability to constrain terrorist mobility overseas. The second pillar is to deny terrorists the ability to enter, exit, and travel within the United States. The 3 strategic objectives under Pillar 1 hope to combat terrorist mobility outside the United States. These strategies are to suppress terrorists' ability to cross international borders, help partners nations build capacity to limit terrorist travel, and to deny terrorists access to resources that facilitate travel. The three strategic objectives under Pillar 2 hope to deny terrorists the ability to enter, exit, travel within the United States. These pillars' strategies are to inhibit terrorists from crossing U.S. borders, enhancing the U.S. ability to detect and constrain terrorist travel within the United States, and to strengthen U.S. identity verification systems. Essentially, Pillar 1 outlines the United States' international efforts to combat terrorism travel, while Pillar 2 primarily concerns domestic efforts to combat terrorism within the United States. In essence, the NSCTT promotes a global governance approach to preventing terrorist travel and combating crime that is cross-border, with the United States taking the lead. They are far from alone in understanding the importance of international collaboration in order to prevent terrorist travel and other cross-border crimes such as trafficking, cybercrime, and others discussed throughout this class. The UK Border Agency has concluded that they cannot achieve their goals of securing the borders in isolation and are willing to work in partnership not only with the rest of the United Kingdom's government, but also their international partners, industry, and the public. The complexity of cross-border illicit activity requires cooperation on border security, often means there is a need to expand beyond those countries where traditional cooperation and agreements exist. This same global strategy is also needed to combat criminal organizations, including those involved in human trafficking, human smuggling, drug smuggling, as well as cybercrime. Combating these various global threats to security must be coordinated using all means of global governance available. These include bilateral and multilateral agreements and actions, international regimes, international and regional organizations, global civil society, and transgovernmental networks. But what exactly is global governance? Global governance is a movement towards political integration of transnational actors aimed at solving problems that affect more than one state or regions when there is no power of enforcing compliance. Global governance and actors involved in global governance include states, international organizations, as well as non-state actors. There are a variety of tools available to these transnational actors whose goal it is to solve problems that affect more than one state. These tools include bilateral and multilateral action or agreements, international regimes, international and regional organizations, global civil society organizations, and transgovernmental networks. The first tool available in global governance are bilateral agreements or actions. These are agreements between two states in which they come to an agreement to take collective action to address a specific problem or problems. Three examples in which the United States is involved include the United States-Canada Smart Borders Declaration and 30-point action plan, the Beyond Borders Agreement, and the U.S.-Estonian Agreement to enhance cooperation into preventing and combating of serious crimes. The goal of the Smart Borders Declaration was to enhance the security of our shared borders while facilitating the legitimate flow of peoples and goods. The action plan had 4 pillars: to secure the flow of people, to secure the flow of goods, to secure infrastructure, and information sharing and coordination in the enforcement of these objectives. What made this declaration so important important was that there were 30 points that provided a roadmap for bilateral cooperation on border security. Many of these 30 points described in the Declaration and Action Plan were already in place before its signing. However, they needed to be adopted or expanded to deal with the threats presented by international terrorist criminal organizations and cyber threats. Other points, while discussed in the past, required a level of harmonization that were once thought highly unlikely or impossible. Two of these points, once thought to be unlikely to be adopted, are closely linked: the use of biometric identifiers in border inspections and a single alternative inspection system. A more recent bilateral agreement between the United States and Canada has come about during the first term of the Obama administration was the Beyond the Borders Agreement, which is a shared vision for perimeter security and economic competitiveness. Key areas of cooperation in this agreement are to address threats early, facilitate trade, economic growth, and jobs, integrate cross-border law enforcement, as well as critical infrastructure and cybersecurity strategies. It is the hope of this plan, by working together between themselves and with third countries and international organizations, to intend to facilitate security sector reform and capacity built around the globe to enhance the security that contributes to the overall security of both the two signatories and the globe as a whole. A different international agreement that the United States entered into with a country other than Canada is in 2008, the United States and Estonia signed a memorandum of understanding stating that Estonia's membership in the visa waiver program required a formal arrangement between the countries for sharing information on certain criminal activity. The agreement included the sharing of personal data, fingerprint data, DNA data, and providing points of contact for implementation of the agreement once it was signed. Since originally signed with Estonia, 7 new members have entered into the similar agreements with the United States as a term of their admission into the visa waiver pilot program. In fact, when the United States Congress passed legislation in 2007 allowing for expansion of the visa waiver program, to include any additional members into the program would require these countries to cooperate with the United States, specifically in regards to sharing information in the area of security and law enforcement. The second type of tool available for global governance is multilateral agreement or action. Multilateral agreement and actions are similar to bilateral actions. However, it requires 3 or more states to enter into an agreement to help solve a problem that affects more than one state or region. When it comes to multilateral agreements and action in order to address global threats such as terrorism, border security, transnational crime, and cyber threats, the European Union and the United States have been the forefront of these international efforts and have entered into various agreements centered on the issue of these issues, including such other areas as of border control, government surveillance, data collection, and exchanging other security documents and information. One example of such a multilateral agreement or action within the continent of Europe was the Treaty of Prüm. Despite numerous agreements between the EU members designed to promote intelligence sharing and cooperation, national police forces continued not to share information, and there were no mechanisms put in place to compel them to do so. As a result, Germany, France, Belgium, and Luxembourg recognized the rules to combat serious cross-border crime and terrorism under the Schengen Agreement and the European Union were not sufficient, and there remained a need for more closer police cooperation among these neighbors. After several rounds of negotiations and the inclusion of the Netherlands, Austria, Spain, The Treaty of Prüm was signed in May 27, 2005. The treaty became so popular among other nations within the European Union in 2007, the treaty was submitted to the European Council for integration into the third pillar of the European Union. The following year, the European Parliament voted to accept the Treaty of Prüm after requiring an increased protection for ordinary citizens within the treaty. Another tool available for the governance of global threats to security are international regimes. Regimes can best be described as a set of implication or explicit principles, norms, rules, and decision-making procedures around which actors' expectations converge in given areas of international cooperation. For regimes to exist, there needs to be a set of issues that require collective action. Regimes are social structures that have limited powers to impose rules. Rather, members become tied to formalized patterns of behavior in which they feel obligated to cooperate so as not to be viewed as untrustworthy. As a result, the social structure of regimes tend to develop between states that share norms and values and between whom a tradition of cooperation already exists. This is especially the fact when the cooperation is centralized around particular issues, such as those discussed in this class. Unfortunately, when it comes to areas of global security, there has not been a great deal of progress when it comes to global threats. In fact, the most significant progress has been made in the areas of biometric entry and exit systems, electronic passports, passenger data sharing agreements, and electronic travel authorization systems. And in these areas, cooperation has been limited primarily to member states of the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. While cooperations in these areas of biometric entry systems, electronic passports, passenger data sharing agreements, and electronic travel authorization systems may have laid the foundation for a global security regime that could be used to combat all the various threats, including terrorism, transnational crime, and cyber threats, these agreements did not occur without a great deal of negotiation. When disputes did arise, the parties often took their grievances in negotiations and turned them over to international organizations that had particular expertise in these given areas in order to resolve these disputes. This brings us to the next tool of global governance to try and combat global threats to security. These are international organizations and regional organizations. Perhaps the most important one that most people are aware of is the United Nations. The United Nations has played an active role in trying to combat and curtail a variety of transnational crimes, including human smuggling and human trafficking. The UN and its predecessor, the League of Nations, have targeted human trafficking since the earliest 20th century, and since the 1990s they have created and enacted numerous anti-smuggling and anti-trafficking committees and conventions. The same cannot be said for combating terrorism or terrorism travel. Both the United States and Europe has found it difficult to achieve progress in these areas with the UN. The General Assembly itself has proven to be a particular obstacle for the United Nations becoming a more relevant actor. One reason for this is the lack of cooperation is the multiplicity of perspectives held in the Assembly's members, particularly from states that support terrorist groups or have sympathy for the groups that employ terrorist tactics. The International Police Organization, or Interpol, has tried to take a more active role in combating terrorism, trafficking, and cyber threats. In 2002, Interpol began with a few thousand entries in a handful of countries and created a stolen and lost travel document database. The Interpol's database enabled law enforcement elsewhere in the world to instantly run checks against databases, allowing border control officers to verify if a document is reported stolen or a lost nationality or internationally identified card has been attempted to use. Ironically, this was the same system that was used to identify two passports used to board the downed Malaysian flight that crashed into the Indian Ocean as being stolen. The problem with Interpol is that its 187 members do not necessarily trust each other. Many members assume, and in some cases rightfully so, as we saw in Guinea-Bissau, that the criminal networks they are fighting have penetrated law enforcement agencies in other nation-states. Some member states may face domestic legal impediments to sharing information with international partners or member states' law enforcement and intelligence agencies. In addition, some law enforcement and intelligence agencies may have a culture of holding on to specific valued information, making effective collaboration almost impossible. Below Interpol and within the framework of the European Union, the European Police Office, or Europol, was established to provide a central European Union mechanism for greater cross-border cooperation communication among member states' police agencies. It has established the Europol computer system as a vast database of criminal suspects and stolen goods. The system has been linked to the Schengen Information System, which is used for border enforcement. Beyond this system, however, Europol has been plagued by many of the same issues that have led Interpol's ineffectiveness in combating terrorism, transnational crime, and cyber threats, mainly mistrust and professional competitiveness. As a result, member states' national police forces continue not to share information, and there is no mechanism in place to compel them to do so. In the area specific to border security within Europe, the organization Frontex was created for the purpose of coordination of intelligence-driven operational cooperation at the European Union level to strengthen the security of the European Union's external borders. It then started to take a more active role in actual enforcement of border security. However, it is reliant on its members' nations for support. That being said, the European Parliament has taken some actions to strengthen Frontex and given the agency more power. This includes the ability to acquire its own helicopters and cars to patrol the European Union's frontiers. Another tool available in global governance, and one that's a little bit different than others in that it does not include specifically governments, is global civil society. Global civil society refers to the vast assemblage of groups operating across borders and beyond the reach of government. There is a number of groups, activities, and networks that make up global civil society. These include nonprofits, businesses, social movements, tourists, academics, artists, cultural performers, ethnic and linguistic groups, and so on. In essence, it is a society of societies with rules and norms of conduct. Global civil society is still evolving, and whose importance will depend on its ability to become better integrated into governance institutions already discussed and invested in universal values. In essence, global civil society is made up by civil society organizations. The increasingly accepted understanding of the term civil society organizations is that of non-state, non-profit, volunteer organizations formed by people that form a social sphere. The term is used to describe a wide range of organizations, networks, associations, groups, and movements that are independent from government and sometimes come together to advance their common interests through collective action. Traditionally, civil society organizations include all organizations that occupy the social space between family and the state, excluding political parties and firms because of their entrenchment in the government and entrenchment within business. When it comes to areas of global security, such as terrorism, transnational crime, and cybersecurity, or cyber threats, global civil society has not shown to be a very viable tool of global governance to combat these threats. One area where it has had limited success is in the area of human trafficking and smuggling. Even in the area of human trafficking, their success or their role has been very limited to what has been referred to as the 3 Ps and the 4 Rs. The 3 Ps are prevention, protection, and prosecution of offenders, or I should say those engaged in human trafficking, and the 4 Rs are rescuing, rehabilitation, repatriation, and reintegration of those victims of human trafficking. Global civil society does actually hold a unique prospect for dealing with issues of global threats to security. This is especially true when those members of a global civil society organization are former law enforcement, intelligence, or government officials or other individuals with certain powers that allow them to confront these issues directly. At this point, I would ask you to go to the content for this week's, or go to the content section for this week and look at the video entitled Video Clip Number 1. This is a rather long video, but gives you an extensive look at how one global civil society organization has gone to the next level to combat a specific threat to global security, transnational crime, specifically the area of human trafficking within Thailand.